Hello everyone, here we are for week 3. So I'm here on Blackboard. Hi, by the way, welcome to June. When you go onto Blackboard and you look under lab material, we can see that week 3 has a lot. So this is why I wanted to make a little video. It's difficult to break down this material into 6 weeks, as you well know. It just so happens that week 3 is going to have the most work for lab. There's just really no way of getting around it. So I wanted to just give you a heads up. It's nothing that you can't do, but you're going to have to devote enough time. The good news is once you get past this week, we'll get back to the same workload that we've had for weeks 4 and 5. And then the last week, you're able to focus only on a lecture final exam. All right, so when you look at week 3 for lab, we have the skeletal system, the muscular system, the brain, and the senses. Woo! So what I've done is I put it in folders for you, and for the bones and muscles, you're being asked to know the major bones and the major muscles. So I know when you see this list of bones, for example, which is 35 total, you might think, oh my God, that's so many. And to be honest with you, 35 out of 200 plus bones is not that many. But if this is new to you, it is going to take time. All right? So under each one, you'll see a list of bones to know, for example. And then I've got pictures for you, okay? And what I've done is I've circled the ones you need to know. If you have 35 bones to know, don't try and memorize all 35 at once. Do 10 structures a day, okay? This is just memorization. You can totally do it if you put enough time into it. Your lab quiz is going to be labeling. So you'll see a picture, for example, of the skull, and then you'll see a blank arrow pointing to this blue bone, and then it'll be multiple choice. Is the blue bone here up top, is it A, parietal, B, occipital, C, frontal, D, temporal? And you would pick A, parietal. You only have to know the ones that are on the list. So I've only circled the ones that were on the list. For the rib cage, you only have to know that there's true, false, and floating. You don't need to know the numbers. For the cervical vertebrae, I would like you to know the numbers. There are 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar, plus the sacrum, plus the coccyx. See, it's going to be worth you listening to this video because I'm going to give you some tips. When you're trying to memorize the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar, one way you can do it is you can think of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You usually have breakfast around 7 a.m., and there are 7 cervical. You have lunch around noon, 12. There are 12 thoracic. And you may have dinner around 5 p.m., 5, which is dinner, right? 5 p.m., 5 lumbar. And that's a typo, not lumbar. It should be lumbar with a B. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, 7, 12, 5. And then I've listed the parts of the lower extremity you need to know and the parts of the upper extremity you need to know. You don't need to know these numbers. You don't need to know there's 8 carpals, 5 metacarpals, and 14 phalanges. Just know the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. What you're going to see is in the toes, it's tarsals. So they sound very much alike. Tarsals and metatarsals in the foot. Carpals and metacarpals in the hand. How do I remember that? I remember it because of the carpal tunnel. Maybe you've heard of carpal tunnel. It's a condition in the wrist. So I automatically think hand. Versus the tarsals and metatarsals, I think about T for toe. Okay, these are things that can really help you. I want to do one last thing for the bones. If you look at the forearm, we have the ulna and the radius. Depending on how the hand is, you can see now the thumb is pointing out, but if that person moved their hand so the thumb was in, the forearm bones cross. But the way that you can always understand them, the ulna is always the same side as the pinky. I had this, I had anatomy for the first time probably 20 years ago, and I still remember it to this day. For some reason, it stuck in my head, PU, like someone smells in elementary school, PU, pinky ulna. Or you could memorize it as up, ulna, pinky. And if you memorize the one side, then you'll automatically know the other because the radius is always on the same side as the thumb. So pinky ulna, pinky ulna. So that's how I would suggest trying to learn these, okay? On the lab quiz, I'm obviously not going to be able to ask you all of them, but you're not going to know which ones I'm going to ask. So that's why you need to memorize all of them. Let's look at the muscles. You're going to be responsible for 24 muscles. Many of my students find that the names of the muscles are a little bit more difficult. And that's true. But for your lab quiz, it's multiple choice. So you'll only have to be able to identify it. Some of these you probably already know, but many of them are going to be new. So I've put on some pictures here and I've labeled them. The rectus abdominis is the six-pack muscle. The external oblique is the muscle on the side of the abdomen. And then the serratus anterior, it's kind of hard to see, but the serratus anterior are the muscles that are higher up near the armpit. It's common to switch up the serratus anterior and the external oblique. The external oblique is further down, further inferior. So think about the external oblique as being down by the abdomen, whereas the serratus anterior is higher towards the armpit. Here are the muscles of the upper body. You can see there's a grouping on the anterior side of the wrist. As a group, they're called wrist flexors. But we're also asking you one of those muscles specifically. So if you look on this gentleman's left arm, brachioradialis, it's on the thumb side. Make sure that you get familiar saying the whole word. Biceps brachii, triceps brachii, pectoralis major. So make sure you're paying attention to the whole word. Just like there were wrist flexors on the forearm on the anterior side, there are wrist extensors on the forearm on the posterior side. This is why it was helpful to learn those terms. See how it all comes together? Then we have the thigh. On the anterior thigh in the blue, there's a muscle group called the quadriceps. That muscle group has 4 muscles. That's why it's called quadricep. Quad means 4, but you only have to know 3 of them. Rectus femoris is the muscle right in the middle of the thigh, which is part of the quadriceps. And then vastus medialis is the quad muscle on the medial side, hence the word vastus medialis and vastus lateralis. It's kind of hard to see on this picture, but as the name suggests, vastus lateralis is on the lateral side of the thigh. On the posterior part of the thigh, we have the hamstrings, shown in green, and there are actually 3 muscles that make up the hamstrings. You only have to know one, and that's the biceps femoris. This is why it's important, ladies and gentlemen, to say the full word. The biceps brachii refers to the muscle in our arm. Brachial, think of the brachial artery. Brachial means arm. In the hamstring, it's called the biceps femoris. Think about by the femur, right? Biceps just means it has 2 heads to the muscle, but don't worry about it. Then we can see some other muscles you have to know. It just takes time, okay? So I know that you can do this. You have to know, how many muscles did I say? 24. I think there's 24 muscles. And that's out of 600. We have over 600 skeletal muscles. So you can totally do it. Just don't wait till the last minute. I want to point out, while we're on this, the gastrocnemius is the calf muscle, and then underneath it is the soleus. It's kind of hard to show 2-dimensionally, but they're on top of each other. The gastrocnemius is more superficial, and then the soleus is behind it. Notice all these terms we're using. Oh, it's so great. Let's go back to the lab material. Week 3, so skeletal, muscular. For the brain and reflex arc, there's only one virtual lab this week, and that's going to deal with reflexes. And then there's also some brain anatomy, 23 structures to know. So again, we're really piling it on this week, and I'm sorry, but there's just no way of getting around it. We have to get through the material. This is the only week where it's going to be this busy. So if you get through it, and don't forget, if you do well on your lab assignment, that's out of 50 points, just like the quiz is. So you can totally do well. We've got a picture of the brain. Start off by learning the 4 main parts of the brain. And I put them in different colors. The cerebrum is the outer worm-like part. The diencephalon is the part kind of in the middle. It's in that black square. On the posterior side is the cauliflower-looking thing called the cerebellum. And then the brainstem is literally the stem of the brain. So I would start memorizing there. And then we get more specific. So what are the specific parts of the cerebrum you need to know? Cerebral cortex is the outer rim of the cerebrum. The gyri and sulci. A sulcus is a depression. So in other words, if you look at the outer cerebral cortex, see how the surface of the cortex goes up and down? That's on purpose to increase surface area. Anytime that surface goes in, it's a sulcus, or plural is sulci. Anytime that surface puffs up, it's a gyrus, or plural is gyri. The way that I've always remembered that is I think about sulcus. If I'm like down, if I'm depressed, I sulk. So a sulci is a depression. All right, so these tips can really help you. The cerebrum has 2 halves connected in the middle by the longitudinal fissure. The parts of the cerebellum, the inner pattern of white matter is called arbor vitae because it's shaped like a tree of life. The whole thing is the cerebellum. The brainstem has 3 parts, midbrain, pons, medulla, in that order. And the diencephalon has different regions. The green region is the thalamus. And then if you go in front and down a little bit, we have the hypothalamus. Hanging down from the hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. And then behind it all is the pineal gland. If we look at the covering of the brain collectively is called the meninges. But that covering has 3 layers. The outermost layer is the dura mater. Then there's an arachnoid space with little fibers and blood vessels. And then the pia mater is what clings directly to the cerebral cortex. I've always remembered that simply by DAP. Dura mater, arachnoid, pia. I would probably ask you those in a question because I find this picture to be a little confusing because it shows you more than you need to know. But as long as you know them in order, from outermost covering to innermost covering, dura mater, arachnoid space, pia mater. I will note that the arachnoid space is a space and it has the blood vessels. You need to know 2 cranial nerves. Cranial nerve number 1 is called the olfactory. We can see 2 kind of looking like antennas on the bottom of the brain. The optic nerves, which eventually go to the brain, hence the word optic. And where the optic nerves come together is called the optic chiasm. So along with each folder, you will see a folder of labeled pictures and then also a folder of unlabeled. So this way you can practice yourself. Also, for many of them, I give you some websites. So for example, under skeletal system, we have the labeled pictures. the unlabeled pictures, and then there's a link to an Anatomy Arcade website that is helpful for some people. So you've got to figure out what's going to work best for you. Do you like to just have the picture and keep quizzing yourself? And the same thing for muscles. There is an Anatomy Arcade muscle website. You got to think what's going to work best for you. The final lab is for the senses, and I'm only asking you to know structures of the eye. So again, there's a labeled picture and there is an unlabeled picture. When it comes to the structure of the eye, we can talk about it in layers. The outermost layer around the whole eyeball is called the sclera, which is kind of gray in color. The middle layer is shown as red, is the choroid, all the way around. And then the innermost layer, shown here as yellow and reddish, is called the retina. I'm not going to go through everything, but listen, I am here if you have questions. I find that if I go through every single structure, it can be really boring, and that's not the way that students learn best. So I want to point out some things to give you tips, like the pinky and the ulna, things like that. There are some dissection videos. There's a dissection of the cow eye, which you would usually do in class, and I'm kind of bummed. There is going to be a video of the sheep brain. So you're welcome to look at those. However, your lab quiz this week will only include human diagrams. So even though I encourage you to look at the cow eye dissection video and the sheep brain dissection video, you will not be tested on the sheep brain or the cow eye, even though they have mostly the same structures. Only tested on human pictures. All right, so just want to give you a little video, pump you up. This week has the most, and I know it's going to be a lot. Ask questions, email me. You can send me a message on Remind, that Remind app. If I go back to the announcements, some of you have already utilized that. It's just like text messaging without us having to know each other's phone number. It's great. So there's information here. It's a free app for your smartphone. Week 3 is going to be long and tough, but it's the longest and the hardest one. After you get through it, it will get easier. I will end with a picture of my dog, all right? So, Dr. Jenkins here, signing off. If you have questions, reach out. Otherwise, stay cool.